Okay, welcome everyone. I'm going to do a closing market wrap-up video summarizing some really key things that happened today. I think it's important to point out because we're starting to see a change in character in the market, and I think it's just starting, so it doesn't have to continue, but we might be at a inflection point. So we'll get started. Give me a thumbs up. I do appreciate that. We're going to go through the indices, then we'll look at some trade ideas. Triple Qs. So Triple Qs just broke down today. We got another sell signal. The main thing to look at is the bearish rising wedge. I pointed out in the video earlier today I was looking for selling to continue into the close. So if we go to the hour, well, before we move on to the hourly, you see that breakdown from that high right there. So this was your bearish rising wedge, and we got a gap down, and it sold off, closing at the low of the day. So very bearish close, and it was a breakdown or a sell signal. So we have a sell signal in Triple Qs, which means I think there's a lot more selling to come. I think we're definitely headed down to 300. About 300 level. Probably get a good reaction or a bounce there. I think we'll get down to that 300 relatively quickly. Again, you have to realize that the market is extremely lopsided right now. Everyone is loaded long. Everyone is loaded bullish. So they basically, when you have such a lopsided market, there's not a lot of shorts to cover. You can get swift moves. The floor fall. The floors opens up and the market just falls. So I think that is probably the highest. I think that's a very high probability right now. We get a swift drop to 300. We'll probably get a bounce there. We'll see, but I think it's likely you get a bounce. And again, when you have big moves to the downside, you can have big counter trend bounces as well. So I think as volatility starts to expand, we're going to see big moves in both directions. But ultimately, I think at the end of the day, we're going to start to trend down. At least getting a correction down to about 300, and that is a move from here down another 7%. So we'll watch that. Looking at the hourly, though, this is what I want to point out. A little bit of a change in character. So the last couple days, last week, you can see we gapped down, the dip buyer stepped in here. Gap down again, dip buyer stepped in again. Friday, it moved down, but the buyers were still there at the end of the day. How he's kind of moved up. Today, moved down, the buyer stepped in, but they lost the battle, and then selling resumed to the downside. So a little bit different character in terms of what was happening. I think the sellers are in control at this moment in time. They were in control today at least. And yeah, I think we're heading down, heading lower. A little bit of reaction here, possibly at 313, or it's about 313.88 is what I have. But again, I think 300 is the more, the bigger level of support. So we'll look for that. So SPY, same deal. SPY basically, you can see SPY was stronger, definitely stronger today than Qs. There was more selling in tech than the SPY, but you can see at the end of the day, the selling still started to come into SPY as well. XLF, the financials, is the reason why the SPY and oil in general, the oil and XLF is the reason why the SPY was able to hold up relatively well. But I think it's with those big market cap weighted stocks, technology makes up about 26% of the S&P 500. So if technology's selling, it's going to put a lot of pressure on that index. Again, we've got, from my perspective, it looks to me, if I go to the daily, you can see this bearish rising wedge. I have it marked in green. Broke down, back test, starting to roll over. So I'm looking for more selling to come into this. And I think we are headed, we're headed quite a bit lower, to be honest. What levels to watch for? I'll have to do a little more homework. I've been a little more focused on Qs, but I think 362, and then this upward trend line right here up at, it's ascending, so 360, depending on when we get there, that might be the near-term bottom of this move, about another 7-8%. That kind of lines up with that drop in Qs. One thing to note, I think it's just important to kind of pay attention to, the bonds didn't catch a bid today. So you look at BND, this is kind of a bond ETF, sold off, and TLT, the long bond, sold off as well. So no bid in the long bond, which is where you would expect safety, a safety move to go into. So that is concerning. If bonds are going to sell off with stocks, then there's potentially that can be a real problem. One thing that did catch a bid is gold. You can see gold closed up, almost $25. Nice impulsive move off of that divergent low that I have circled here and breaking higher. So I like gold. Looks good to me. If we flip over to these gold miners that I have, you'll see they were all up pretty good. Good moves. Everything's up 5% or so, or more. So good move in these gold miners. There could be some more downside in the miners. They could be building a base, but I think we're at the near area where support is. We're at support where the buyers are at, and that's why last week I talked about in the weekend video I put out about the gold miners. I let everyone know I was adding and building positions in the gold miners because they look like they were at the spot where you want to buy them at, basically. Okay, one thing that was interesting to me, I noticed that the SPY today was not really selling off, but tech was having a good size sell off. I figured that would start to bleed into the SPY, so I started to buy some volatility. I bought VXX, but we did see towards the end of the day, if I go to the hourly chart, you can see that the buyers did start to step in at the end of the day. So you can see volatility was falling even though tech was falling, and that's because the SPY wasn't really, it was kind of hanging in there with the financials and oil hanging in there. But then at the end of the day, SPY sold off and volatility started to rise. So I was buying volatility and I'm looking for volatility to continue higher from here. One thing to point out on UVXY and also VXX, this recent low right in here, that was a divergent low. See how it made a higher low in the momentum? Momentum is moving up in volatility, and yet price continued to drift lower. Now these aren't the best to chart against because they have decay, so they will drift lower over time because of that decay. But when they're directional, when they're trending, there's really not much decay when they're actually trending. So I'm looking for this to start to move higher. We could easily see something like this. If I go back, I don't know if we're going to get a spike like we saw back here in March. That was pretty rare. I think that had never happened, that big of a spike in volatility. But look at what happened in the past. We had an initial spike right there, sold off a little bit, and then we had the real move in volatility. Okay, so maybe that's what's happening now. We had the initial spike here, sold off a little bit. Now we're going to get the real move. If we do, then I'd look for 2370 or 2350 area. We've also got 2930 area, potentially up to this 4650 area. Any one of those could prove to be, those should be resistance levels. So I would look at, those as areas to take profit if we get that move higher. Okay, TAN closing. TAN's on a sell signal, which means it's a short basically, or if you're long, I guess you could, opportunity to exit your longs. You can see here coming off the March lows, clean uptrend line, and we recently just broke. So there's your breakdown, gap down, and impulsive selling pretty much throughout the day. What's a sell signal? Some people ask, well, usually when you're breaking support, so this is like a support line, when you're breaking that, especially impulsively, which means like gap, think about the other side of the trade to try to determine what a sell signal is. If you're long the stock and you wake up and it's gapped down on you, all of a sudden just out of the blue, you're losing money or you're not able to get out of your position, then that's a sell signal. So an example would be, this is a trend line that everybody can spot in TAN. They're just riding the trend. The trend is your friend until it ends. And so they're waiting for when it ends. And every single time it gets a support, they buy. So when if you got down to support and then just gap down and doesn't give you an opportunity to buy and also doesn't give you an opportunity to maybe exit as clean of a price as you would like, that's a sell signal. So usually when you see a gap down and then look for it to sell off in that gap, that's a sell signal. Or sometimes it'll just start selling off impulsively, closing, and never recovering that former trend line. Sometimes you'll see it sell off, start to recover, but then sell off, even more. That's a sell signal. You want to look for impulsive selling, all right? And you want to look for a move away from the trend line. If it's just hovering right there at the trend line, just barely below, that's not a sell signal. You need impulsive selling, gap downs, and no chance of recovery. Okay, I'll just go through some of these trade ideas that I've covered in the past in case anybody's, looking at these trades. Pins, March 2020 lows, clean up trend line right there. There's your break in trend. We had negative divergence, back test, and each one of these is a back test. So back test there, back test there. I think earnings came out right here and it gapped up. When it moved higher, this is when I entered the trade. I got short on this day. Went against me a little bit, started to kind of go against me, but I didn't get out because nothing had broken. All right, we were below trend line support. We were just back testing. We had negative divergence. It had everything that you need to take a trade on a short trade, and now I'm looking for just price to start to roll over. I've got a level of support right down here at about $50, and then we also have a gap way down here at $25.40. So those are the two main levels I'm looking at in this trade, and obviously I'll be taking profit at each one of those if we hit those. PayPal, continued to break down and inside this bearish rising wedge here. So we overshot the wedge to the upside. That's a low probability area. And it looks like we're going to break down. Now, PayPal doesn't have negative divergence, so I'm not in this trade. I'd prefer to take something that has a little bit better of a technical setup, but does have a bearish rising wedge. We did overshoot it, and it has now collapsed back into the wedge. So that's a bull trap right there. I'd be looking for this to break this lower trend line support and then continue lower. Probably heading down, I would say target of 175.60 is a pretty reasonable target on this. From where it's at now, that would be a drop of about 36%. But by the time you get the breakdown here, it's not going to be as much of a drop. Etsy, bearish rising wedge right in here with negative divergence on the daily chart. See the negative divergence? So we broke trendline support. A little bit more downside would have been nice to see it. It did close below what looks like support at 214. About 214, and yeah, it's about 214. So we'll look for some more downside. I think there is some more downside coming in this one, especially if the rest of the market breaks down. If the market's going to continue to break down, these high flyers, these are the momentum names that everybody's been piled into, and they've just been going kind of straight up. When that momentum wears out and reverses, it's the same kind of thing to the downside. Everybody who's piled into this thing scramble to all get out, but there's not enough seats for everyone when everyone tries to get out at the same time. And so you can see big swift moves to the downside in these things when the momentum breaks. Peloton, solid, down 10% today. And I've talked about this trade for a while. Again, it's not so much, this trading strategy that I outline in my course. The link is in the description below. It's not so much, when things are going against you, you get a lot of people talking trash, and you think of it as a poker game. They want a hand, they want a pot. All right, so they're talking trash because they want a pot, but I'm trying to win the game. So to win the game, you got to sit there, and as long as the technicals look good, you just stay in the trade. And so Peloton, got short right here. I outlined it the day that I was getting short. I've talked about it for, all this time, that I thought it was still look good to the downside. And sure enough, we're continuing, now to the downside. So this thing from where I got short is, about 20%, down 20% from there. And I'm looking for some more downside. I did take a little bit of profit today. And I'm looking for, I think we get a bounce in this area. We kind of closed at support, basically, at right around this 126. So we could get a bounce here, but I am looking for, some more downside. I think ultimately we head down to this, $100 area. Looking for that one. Qualcomm resuming its downward trend. So the trend is no longer up in Qualcomm, but you made a new lower low today. So you can see, you made a lower high when here and then a lower low today. So I think the trend now is down. We've got gap fill right there at 130.26, and then we also have another gap all the way down here. There is some support right here at you've got some support at that 130 area, and then you got some support at this 110 area, and then below that we have a gap all the way down here. So the gap for me would probably be the final target, about 93.78. That would be my final target on this trade. Zillow Group, nice impulsive breakdown today. Now they already broke it down once. This was a bear trap, so you can see this trend line on the daily chart that we've been walking up. And it did break it once, but then they recovered it, gapped it up. So nice, that's a bear trap, but we're broken down again. So closing back below, pretty impulsive sell-off, down almost 10% today, and breaking trendline support. So to me, this looks good. Also, you look at the momentum indicators, the RSI and the PPO. Now, the PPO did burn through its negative divergence right there. So that is no longer a negative divergence. However, if you look at the RSI, it did not. So kind of split momentum. But we did break trendline support. So I do think we're heading lower. Where are we going? Well, I'll go ahead and get rid of this line. This is most likely going to be your first level of support right there at 133.50 about. And from where we're at, that's a drop of 23% or so, 24%. So that's likely going to be your first level of support, probably get a bounce there. And then we'll have to see how the rest of the markets look at that time. NEO. All right, so NEO, here's your uptrend line. I've talked about this one for a while. And this is your more major uptrend line right here. We have now broken that trend line support. So that's a clean breakdown. That's a sell signal on NEO, breaking trendline support. Negative divergence on the RSI and the PPO, signaling a trend change was likely. And now that we broke trendline support, I think we're heading lower. I think we're at least heading down to this 22.17, and possibly going to go fill these gaps down here all the way at $7, $8, $8 basically. So we'll watch that one. Okay, let's go over to Tesla. Big down day in Tesla today, down 8.5%. And basically Tesla's got a ways to go down. So I think the next, we're really in this area. Let me kind of mark it out. We're in this area right here where it is kind of a thin zone. A thin zone is where just not a lot of trading's taking place. So you can see in Tesla, we had a lot more trading kind of through here in this area. And then we just shot straight up. And then we traded in this area for quite a while, but we're now breaking down out of that area. So I think we're going straight down to this zone here. So the first level of support that I can find, it's not the cleanest area. We don't, it was kind of an upward support zone. But I do see, the first reaction area of support looks to be right in this area, about 625. So I think we're heading straight there. Whether we might bounce a little, but I think ultimately I think it's very probable we will be down in this area, get a bounce there. Tesla has a ways to fall, though. It's really extremely overvalued when it comes to, a lot of different metrics. So, you also see this big consolidation area right here where we traded quite a bit. So I think it will be very likely once we break this area of 625, we head straight down to that area, which will likely be, in the 407 to up to 450, 460 or so, 465, sorry. It's right in there. So again, those are a couple levels to watch. We could get there pretty quickly if this market wants to sell off, rather quickly. Okay, and I'll just wrap up with this one. Pulte Homes, PHM, uptrend. You have an upward trend line right here, and we're just starting to crack that right there. We did have, we have negative divergence across the PPO and the RSI. and that remains intact. So this was a divergent high, and we now are looking for this trend to break. If this trend breaks here, which you can see it's just starting to crack it, we'll see what tomorrow brings. But if that breaks, then I think it's very likely that we are heading down to gap fill right there at about, it's right about 39.72, and that would be a drop from here of about 12.5%. So I'll be watching for that. I'm not sure if I'll take the trade, but again, I just want to point it out. So that's all I got. That's kind of how we ended the day. Looks like we're going lower. So I would probably expect the futures to gap down tonight, overnight, for the futures to sell off and we wake up to a gap down. Doesn't have to be like that, but I think that there's a good likelihood that happens. And that's all I got. So thank you. Leave me a thumbs up. Catch you guys on the next one.